Okay, now that we've talked about parent graphs, let's practice some of this. First off, there are some pieces of this assignment that you are going to do on your own, and that you'll submit them. It has all the instructions in Canvas called the 1.1 in-class assignment. So as we go through this assignment, there will be some problems we'll do as a class on here, some that you'll do on your own. So first off, this whole table right here, you can reference your notes from the last video. I want you to fill out this table all on your own. So next, let's talk about domain and range. Okay. State the domain and range of each function in interval notation. This is very important. Interval notation is different than inequality notation. Inequality notation we'll talk about at some other point. Interval notation is where you use those parentheses and brackets. So, quick reminder. Parentheses means go up to, but don't include. Brackets means include. And we'll talk about those more as we go through these example problems. The easiest way to find domain and range is by looking at a graph. So thankfully for these first few, we're already given a graph to look at. Sweet. So let's talk about number 1. First thing I notice when I look at number 1, we've got some asymptotes. So I am going to draw in those dotted lines to remind myself of these asymptotes right here. Looks like we have one at -4 and one at +4. Now let's get to the actual problem. We want to talk about the domain and the range. Quick reminder, domain is your x values, range are your y values. So let's start by looking at domain, or your x values. So the thing we're going to think is if I were to go through the domain like as a straight line, what x values does this graph never, ever, ever hit? So if I look at this first one on number 1, the x values are going to hit everything in this whole graph except for -4 and +4. So the way we write that is this domain is going to go from -infinity up to -4. Now because -4 is an asymptote, it means that that graph is going to get closer and closer to -4, but never actually hit it. So that would be a parentheses, not a bracket. We don't want to include 4, we want to go up to it, but not include it. Next, the graph hits all the x values from -4 up to +4. Once again, we're going up to -4 and +4, but not including them. So we're using parentheses, not brackets. And then finally, the graph goes from +4 all the way up to +infinity. Never ever ends. Keeps going. We've got those arrows on the end that show us that. So that's our domain. Those are the x values that this graph is hitting. One other note. Infinities will always have parentheses, not brackets. Never ever put a bracket on infinity with interval notation. So that's interval notation. Now let's look at the range, or the y values. This one, sometimes I like turn my paper around to look at it. We want to ask the same question. Are there any y values that this graph is not going to hit? Now if I look at this middle section of the graph, right there, I have arrows on the end of that, which means that middle section of the graph will go on and on and on up, never end, and go on and on and on down, never end. So eventually this graph is going to hit every single y value. So that means the range will be from negative infinity up to positive infinity. Let's try number 2. Once again, we want domain and range. Let's move that video so you can see it a little better. So, ask the same question. Domain. What x values does this graph not hit? Now let's think about this really quickly. This looks like a root graph, particularly a square root, which means that that right there is not an arrow, it's a point. And we're going to label it. It looks like 5, 1. Because why not? Okay, so it comes up to that point. Now if I think about x values, there is an arrow on the other side of that graph. So this domain will go all the way to negative infinity. Going to hit all those x values to negative infinity. But only goes up to the x value of 5. After that point, graph doesn't exist, so it doesn't hit any of those x values after 5. So now we need to ask, parentheses or bracket, are we including 5 or are we going up to but not including 5? Well, because this is a point, we are including 5, so it's going to be a bracket. Now let's do the range. What y values are we not going to touch? Well, it looks like any y values here. We're not going to get to that part of the graph. So our y values are going to go up to infinity, but only go down to 1. Because after 1, we aren't going to hit any of those y values. Same question as before, parentheses or bracket. What do you think? For this problem, we're going up to 1 and including it because it's a point, so we do have a bracket. Okay, next one, number 3. This one looks like a cubic. We do have arrows on either end. So let's do domain and range. First off, domain, x values side to side. With those arrows on the end, we are going to hit every single x value. So our domain is negative infinity up to positive infinity. We're hitting all of them. Same with range, negative infinity to positive infinity. Because of those arrows, we're going to hit all those values going up and all those values going down. So that's the domain and range on this one. So those are some examples for you. What I would like you to do now is questions 4, 5, and 6 on your own. That will be part of your in-class assignment. In the next video, we'll come back and we'll talk about 10, 11, and 12.